Hi guys, thanks for coming out today, I really appreciate it. So, during my time building candles and speaking to thousands of juniors globally, the biggest difference I saw with juniors and seniors was around soft skills and able to have difficult conversations with hiring managers, stakeholders, recruiters on interviews, pushing back on getting budgets signed off, and that often comes through experience, and especially in sort of commercial experience and actually live projects, etc. So we're gonna. The purpose of the panel is to basically educate you on Sorry, I'm not used to speaking in front of quite a big audience, so bear with me. I'll get used to it. The purpose is going to be around educating you guys on having the ability to push back on stakeholders, recruiters, getting a pay rise, all that kind of good stuff. So we're going to kick off with a few introductions. So Vondra, if you could kick off and just explain your career journey, how you got here today and how you started in design.
Okay. Is this thing on? No. There we go. Okay, we on? Yeah. What's up? I'm Andrea Burton. I live in Minneapolis, Minnesota right now. So my start in design, I got a degree, I'm from North Carolina, I got a degree in multimedia arts and sciences at the time because I was into sound engineering and I didn't want to write papers anymore. And I graduated in 2001 and I learned Flash and I learned Dreamweaver, but I was like, oh, whatever, web design, I'm gonna do music. But we also were like, oh, we're gonna, it was before the first bubble, the dot-com bubble burst, and we're like, we'll all have jobs, it'll be amazing. And that didn't happen. So UX wasn't even a thing when I started my career, and so I basically am very self-taught, read a lot, taught myself the tools, became a UX designer when that became a thing. I started out in nonprofit tech world. I worked in the content management world, like theming for content management systems. And then product design started to become a thing. I worked at a startup. I did not know what I was doing, and I was kind of like a bull in a china shop. But I just kind of learned along the way, and that's kind of my story, self-made.
Michael, about yourself?
Yeah, I graduated college with a music business degree and headed out to LA because that's what you do when you work in the music business. And quickly realized that no one cares about a music business degree, and so I worked at restaurants for 3 years. I happened to move in with a roommate who was doing web design for a credit repair company. He would work from 12 to 4. And they couldn't fire him because he wrote some software that they couldn't get rid of. And he was making like 3 times as much as me. And so I realized maybe I should learn. So he started giving me overflow clients, and I ended up teaching myself. And that's how I moved into the design and tech industry. I ended up building an agency out of San Diego, and then eventually joining Crew, which was a staffing for freelancers. So we match freelancers and clients. Did that for 3 years, and we sold Crew to Dribbble. And at Dribbble, I've held several positions. Started the sales team, started the marketing team, was the VP of strategy, and recently moved over to the VP of product, kind of back to my roots where I came from. So about 15 years, and here we are. So.
Thanks.
Hi,
Last but not least.
you mentioned the meditative podcast.
Oh yeah,
Okay. I started my career, I thought I wanted to be a lawyer at first, or I had a suspicion that maybe that could work. I'm Persian, I was telling you. So the career choices are kind of like doctor, engineer, lawyer, worst case scenario, government worker. So I'm like, okay, maybe I'll try the lawyer one. And I started as a law clerk. I just didn't like what I was seeing. I also worked for a divorce lawyer, so just terrible things that I saw. I was like, I don't want this. And I had a passion for writing, so I went back to school and studied creative advertising. Figured maybe I can become a copywriter, make some money, write some words, and then graduated during the recession in 2009, so nobody really wanted to give me a job. And I met two of my co-founders, Scott's right here, Scott, in school, and we were just full of like an unjustified amount of confidence at the time. We're like, how hard can it be? We'll start a business, it's fine, we'll figure it out. And we started with like writing radio ads for window companies. We would go to like a dentist and pitch the moon and say, all right, we're gonna do subway ads, we're gonna do radio ads for you. And they'd be like, okay, yeah, but can you make a website? And so we're like, yeah, we kind of did some like GeoCities things back in the day. I don't know if you guys remember. I had like a Brad Pitt fan site. I'm like, we'll figure it out. So then it was a series of being at the right place, at the right time, having the right attitude, and we just ended up pivoting into doing web design and then product org, and got introduced to Chorus, did a bunch of stuff with Rogers, and now we work with some of the biggest North American brands and still kind of sit back and like, how did I get here? But here I am. And yeah, now I run the operations at Playground,
Great.
which is a product design agency. I don't know if I mentioned that part.
So, what do you think the difficulty is with having difficult conversations in the workplace as a junior? So, like when you started your career, did you just take what was given and then not push back? And how did you learn to start pushing back, going, I want more budget, or I want to work more on certain topics, for example?
First I want to say I was at breakfast this morning and I was eating by myself and there was a difficult conversation happening next to me. I was like reviewing my notes and this woman was like apologizing to someone that she had hired about how dramatic the project had gone, and I was like, this is like really good prep. And it went well. I was really impressed by her. I wanted to tell her like, hey, you're doing a great job. She's really humble. She owned like what she was accountable for. But yeah, so when I was a younger designer, I think that I tried to be the loudest voice in the room because I was mostly surrounded by men. As a woman, as a queer person, I was just like, I have something to say. And I think that at times that was detrimental to me, but at times it also like really helped me push forward. And so, what was the original question? Sorry, I went off the question.
First experience of dealing with like difficult conversation, and how do you deal with it?
Yeah, so when talking about this, when approached with the questions, I think the story I came up with was when one of my bosses, it was one of my first UX jobs, I was living in Portland, Oregon, and this was probably about 2009, and he said to me, he was like, well, as a designer, you'll never make more than $50,000 in Portland, which is what I was making at the time, and I was like, and UX kept getting cut off the budget, and I knew that that's just what he thought. I probably didn't have much influence with him. I'd already had the experience of working for him, and so I pretty much just was like, that's bullshit, but, and I found a new job, so
Do you guys think it's, when someone says, for example, we have to cut the budget for research, or we have to cut the budget for such and such, do you think it's always best to go, all right, screw it, we'll do it? Or do you think it's wise to push back? When's it not too wise to push back on stakeholders?
I'd be interested to hear from the agency perspective, because when I was working for agencies, it was really hard to push back. You couldn't argue with the bottom line, but I do think our role as designers is to use our influence to really figure out, like, what point can we speak to? Do we need to speak to data? Do we need to speak to budget? Do we need to speak to empathy? And like really figure out how to make the argument.
What you guys, have you got any input there around?
I think it's leverage, right?
Yeah.
So when you start out, you don't have a lot of leverage. You have to find leverage in the workspace. An exit strategy is leverage, right? Having another plan when you are not happy, or whatever your initiative is doesn't work out, they cut the budget, that's leverage. Bobby Ghoshal from Candid, if anyone knows him, he used to work at Blue Cross. He used to tell his designers, if you want to raise, go find another job offer and bring it back to me and I'll match it.
Why did you do that?
But he found that if the market valued them, I think he was really teaching them, right? That's how you create leverage in that situation, because he could just say no. I want to raise, no.
Sure.
I think there's two ways in those kind of situations, is to find another offer, find someone else who's willing to pay you more, or be doing things that by getting rid of you, they lose, right?
Right in that crop.
So if you can do things that other people don't want to do or aren't doing, and you're filling those holes, now you have leverage to go either ask for a raise, ask for a promotion, ask for more responsibility. But it's rare that you get that by simply asking for it and then receiving it on the back end. No one gives you more responsibility. You have to do the work, and then you can come back with leverage and say, I would like more money, I would like this position, and I would like more pay, or else I will go somewhere else.
A lot of people don't like being so confrontational with their hiring managers. So, like, what about if you're an introvert and you don't want to have confrontation? And how would you sort of deal with that as an introvert? Are any of you naturally introverted? Yeah. How have you dealt with?
So what's the context? Is this about like a promotion or a raise, or the sake of the project?
Sake of the project.
So maybe I've been reading too many Mike Montero books lately, but I really would love for designers to start seeing themselves as gatekeepers for making good decisions for humankind, not just the users, because we are working on things that have the potential to fundamentally change the fabric of society, the way people interact, the way people communicate, the way people commute from a place to another. So I think I had to really get over my introversion by taking on the responsibility that it is a designer's job, or in my case, a business owner's job, to really think about what I'm putting out into the world. And no matter how difficult it is, I have to voice my concerns and say those difficult things that may not line up with the bottom line of my clients, because I have to take responsibility for what I put out into the world.
Do you think that educational programs like General Assembly, Brain Station, universities, do you think we're teaching enough around sort of soft skills, communication?
We're in that school. I don't think so. No.
I will say those schools, I've mentored at one in Minneapolis, and I'm like, whoa, they know more than I do about like deliverables and stuff. And I think they try to do soft skills stuff, but that's just something you learn on the job. And I will say about introversion, like I'm an extrovert, my wife's a complete introvert, and the world is not set up for introverts at all. I've just seen like introverted leaders. I worked at Target for 3 years on the design team, and we had an introverted leader, and he was not successful. So I think you have to find allies. I think you have to find like different techniques to gain that influence. And like you were saying around leverage, like really focusing on what you're interested in. Like I worked with a designer who's like really interested in design critique. So he took that on as his passion. He developed a whole talk about it. He went to the teams and he started talking about, here are the ways we're gonna do design critique. So that was a way for him to like get out into the design community, even, he's actually not an introvert, but I do think that like finding those ways, so.
Is there any rituals that you have in your teams that sort of that help foster that culture of candid conversations and being able to be radically transparent with each other that will enhance their communication?
Yeah, so for us, we try to create as many opportunities for people to hang out and build relationships with each other, because the more rapport you have with your teammates, the easier it becomes to have difficult conversations. A couple of things we do is we do weekly one-on-one meetings with the team members and their managers, and the conversation is centered around their career goals that they set every 6 months. They revisit, they also talk about the day-to-day of projects. But we launched a few months ago an initiative called Connect 4, which every Monday we pull 4 random names out of a hat, And those 4 people have to hang out with each other for at least 1 hour that week. And then they have to they send a picture, and they share it in Slack with us. And usually we just see them come back smiling, and then there's more conversations that happen across the office.
Sure. What about you guys? Have you got any rituals in your teams?
So I guess there's a couple, right? We're fully remote, so we do hangouts. We do spend time at least once a month together as a team talking about things that aren't work. But around the product, we use data, right? And so I encourage my designers to know the market, to know about our data on site, and to be able to make arguments that way. But I also find that not everyone, radical candor, right? You can't do it always in big groups. And so what I try to do is spend time individually to learn what people are thinking, why this idea is valid from their perspective, so that I can be their advocate. Because I can be loud and I have the leverage in the company to be able to be their voice. And when they have good ideas, it's not about stealing their ideas, but if they're not going to be the voice, they need a voice. And for some of our introverted designers who are incredibly talented, they appreciate their ideas making it into the product, even if they don't want to. But that's a personal thing. You have to know people one-on-one. Some people want to do the pitch. They want to get the credit. Others just want to do the work. And so I think it's knowing people on an individual level and being able to address them in that manner.
Do you find there's any constraints with being fully remote on fostering design? It's that culture.
Yeah. Do you want to?
Yeah, Abstract is also fully remote. We have a small office in San Francisco, so I'm not on the design team. I'm a design advocate, so I kind of sit between like sales and marketing and product, but I get to sit in on the design critiques and design reviews. And I think we actually do, we use Zoom a lot, and we obviously use Abstract, and the designers, we really focus on like giving people a chance to talk, really trying not to interrupt, like just basic like human communication stuff. Like being remote really amplifies that. And also being remote, you kind of don't have the politics that you would have. It's there, but it's kind of hidden. But yeah, it's really just like giving people a chance to talk, and allowing, like if someone is introverted, like knowing if you're extroverted, just like shut up sometimes, which is like what I have to tell myself, like I'm just not gonna choose to talk, or I'll just kind of validate everyone, you know? But yeah, that's the experience I have from the remote design. It is not easy to be able to have those conversations. It's almost like you have to over-communicate in a way.
I think just real quick, I think the other important thing that we don't do very well, especially early on, is setting up the goals for the product. So the team is actually having the same conversation. When you send a design team out to design something, if they don't know what the goal is, that's when the conflict between the business team, the sales team, the marketing team, who can be very loud, that's when that conflict comes up. But if you start the project with those goals in mind and pre-address, you can have a more civil conversation because everyone's coming at it trying to solve the same problem. And that's when I found that when, especially design teams get frustrated, is when they're not given all the information up front and they're solving the problem that they thought they were trying to solve, but maybe the CEO or the business side has a completely different perspective, and that's when people come to head. So addressing that as early on as possible seems to smooth out those difficult conversations around the solution.
How do you deal with conflicts when everyone's fully remote? Because obviously in a workplace you just thrash it out in a boardroom, or how do you do that?
Thrash it out in Zoom.
Yeah.
No, you do more personal. So
Okay.
like we do one-on-one. If I see someone struggling, or even if I see a couple people that are just not getting along, it's the same thing as in person. You pull them into a 3-person chat and you make them talk about it. There's no other really way around it. But the more that I can understand both perspectives, that we can build that understanding and that empathy.
Okay, so moving on to salaries, promotions. When was the first time, Michael, that you had a conversation about getting a raise, and how did you go about it?
Let's see. Well, the first time it was my own agency, and we were just terrified to pay ourselves more. So it was kind of a code. But then the first time in the workplace was probably at Crew, and I had had the same salary for 3 years. And I had held like 4 different positions, but we had never really addressed the salary because we were a startup. And so we had the conversation, but the CEO actually brought it up, and so it was a bit easier. And I don't think we ever did anything. We just kind of sat on it for like 3 months, as often startups do, and then we sold the company. But I can speak to the other side of when people have come to me. And oftentimes, if they're doing the work, those conversations aren't a surprise. When it doesn't go well is when they want more responsibility without proving that they can take it on. And then the risk is on me to give it to them, and that's a harder conversation, because I don't know if they can do it, right? And then, but if they're already doing the work and they come to me and say, I'm already doing the work for a principal designer, it's much easier to say, yeah, let me bring that up, let me get you the risk.
Sure. Any of you, Andrea especially, what about when you first started out? What, 50,000?
Yeah.
How did you go?
I definitely have been underpaid most of my career, and I'm only now learning like how to advocate for myself. At Target pays really well, and I probably undervalued myself there as well, but I found allies there that would, and really women who we would just be really honest about, like, hey, this is what I make, what do you make? And then I just started coaching other people when they were getting salary raises. I'm like, I know you can make this much money. So like money is a really like awkward thing to talk about, and at the same time, like, women still are so underpaid. So I do think we need to be having the conversation. The other thing is, the managers, and maybe you can speak to this. The managers have the money. I think you just, like, it's budgets, and they're just like, okay, I think that they can be like, yes, I can give you the money, or no, I can't. And you really do have to show the value. But the money is there, and they're seeing it as a budget line item. I also will say, what I've learned is never take the first offer. Like, if you take the first offer, then they're gonna, like, the people will be like, oh, well, we could have probably paid them less. So always advocate for yourself and, counter offer. And I just learned how to do that, and I was still nervous to do it. So I think, especially women and minorities and other people who have not been valued in our society, like, we need to come together and practice asking for more money, because, it's there and we deserve it, so.
This is red, is this working? Can you see me? Okay. Yeah. So a way to make that conversation a little less awkward is to start planting the seeds way earlier than when you're ready for a promotion. So, if your manager's any good, you could go to them and say, hey, I'm a designer, I'd like to become a senior designer. What should I be working on right now to help me get there? And then that way, I've learned that if you get people invested in your career and then continue to show them progress, that you're taking their advice, and hey, I did the thing, look, I've grown, and then people get even more excited to help you out. So plant the seed, start that conversation way earlier than when you're ready to actually get a promotion.
Where do you think the organs comes from about personal growth questions rather than sort of work-related questions?
Self-worth. I think we all struggle with it, everyone has. And there's no transparency to what you should be getting paid. And so it's hard to point to, unless you have another job offer, it's hard to point and say, once you're working at a job, you've been there for 3 years, it's hard to point and say, I deserve 10,000 more, 20,000 more. I think everyone, there's no formula to it, and I think it's really hard to be your own self-advocate. I just think everyone struggles with it.
Any tips on how you can overcome that? Start focusing on that area and maybe focusing on sort of more personal growth side of things, and then that will only help in the workplace.
The first thing I thought of is something my wife and I do. Do you guys watch Queer Eye? Like JVN? Queer Eye it's just called Queer Eye. It's on Netflix. It's like they remake you, and JVN is always like, she's gorgeous. So my wife and I, whenever we're like not feeling very worthy of ourselves, we're like, turn it around and she's gorgeous. So that's just a funny thing. But I think you're right, like we all deal with that. I think like, yeah, just really trying to figure out like, I like work on my goals. I try to be really clear with like, what do I want to achieve? And, I do think that there's partly like, working on yourself, really being accountable to like the places that you need to grow. Because like I talked about, like I was a bull in a china shop. I can sit back and be like, damn, I really was, And like I take some humility from that, and I like really try to switch the way that I was in the workplace. So I don't know if I answered the question, but she's gorgeous.
What do you think like the top soft skills are to be a good design practitioner? Obviously, rather than the obvious like empathy and...
I think building relationships, and really what I mean is like back channeling and learning how to work the system for your advantage. And so just like pitching, right? Like we go into these rooms and we try to pitch these big ideas, but we're pitching to 10 people who've never heard this idea. They all come from different perspectives. And so, like today, I rarely pitch an idea unless I know at least half the room already knows what it is, and I already know their perspective on it. And that makes it a lot easier to have, when the argument comes, you've got a couple advocates in the room that are already on board.
Yeah.
That's hard to do, but that just comes from pulling people aside and saying, hey, what do you think of this? What do you think of this? And later on what their opinion is, what their concerns are, and what to address before you go in like a bull and try to get big bold changes made. It happens incrementally, and I think it makes all the difference.
For me, I would say the ultimate skill that I think a designer or any human being should work on is listening. And the good question to ask is, am I listening to understand, or am I waiting to speak? And I catch myself a lot of times just waiting because I'm excited about the thing I want to say, and then you're missing what the person's actually communicating. And when you can turn off, get out of your own mind, get out of the own stories that you are telling yourself, and actually listen to people, then you start to notice patterns, start to read between the lines of what are the words they're saying versus what they're actually communicating here. And it just becomes much more easier to navigate life and make good decisions when you can understand people on a deeper level.
Sure. Is there any tips on, in teams, how we can sort of practice radical transparency and candor? And is there anything that you do within your organization?
So I do it with my direct reports. And so for better or worse, they're probably not their favorite manager, but I try to make them a better version of themselves. And so I am very direct with them. It doesn't always translate to them being direct with each other, but at least I can be that example. And then in conversations, you try to get people to share their opinion when you know what it is. When you know that we're discussing something, someone's scared to say it. If you can prompt them or push them or present the idea so that they can have that discussion in a safe environment. But there needs to be training first, I think, before you can really have those honest conversations, especially with a group.
Is there anything as a junior designer you can do where, say you're in a company that is not really design focused, culture's not that great, is there anything that you can do to sort of push that culture forward? Like obviously go to these events, get the knowledge, and go back to your stakeholders with, or?
About creating culture, I led the design ops team at Target for a year, and design ops is this new field, and we're still defining it, but a big part of it was creating culture, and I think it's just really creating relationships amongst the designers. I find a lot of design teams get siloed. You're working on the 1 or 2 products that you're working on. So like really getting designers in the room and doing what we love. You know, if you're not all working together, but you're on this one big UX team, I think it's also like just getting out of the work and doing fun things together.
For sure.
Yeah.
Cool.
I think the most powerful thing a junior brings to a team is questions. Especially those questions where you're like, oh, is this too stupid to ask? But sometimes you get into these grooves of just doing things a certain way for so long that you forget the why behind it. So if you come as a junior and you're asking those really simple questions, then it kind of gets everyone to stop and think about it. And then the work gets better because everybody then has a shared context to build on top of.
Amazing. Cool, we're gonna fire into some questions. So the first one is, when is it too soon to ask for a raise? And how often should you ask for a raise? So say you get rejected for a raise, how often should you go back?
When you can prove that you can do the work.
Okay.
So it's too soon if you don't have the skills needed to move into that position. I don't think there's any timeline. I recently had a product manager who wanted a promotion, but he wasn't there. I gave him a list of things to do and things that he needed to display with the team that he could tackle. He came back 3 months later and a huge improvement because he actually understood what the job and the role meant, and he got a raise. So that could have taken a year, would have been okay. He put the work in, he did it in 3 months.
Had he only been at Dribble for 3 months? Like,
Oh no, he was with me at Crew, so,
Oh, okay.
and this was about 2 years into Dribble.
okay,
Yeah.
Because my immediate reaction is like a year. Like you have to put the work in for a year, but I don't know if that's actually real. So that's why I kind of like was like, I'm curious what the manager has to say.
I think it's when you can see at least the potential or is when, for me, it de-risks the promotion because I'm moving someone into a position that I know that they can thrive in. It's when they struggle, it's a disadvantage, not only for me, but for them, because they're then in over their head, and that's not a great position. And that means they're either going to leave the company because they're unsatisfied, or we're gonna have to lay them off because they're unqualified.
Yeah.
So I never try to move someone into that position too early.
Amazing. So if your career goals exceed what is capable at your current company, how do you bring that up with your hiring manager?
They exceed.
Yeah, so that could I take that as, say you're a fantastic designer and you're not in really design-led, you're not in the design-led culture. How do you bring that up with your hiring manager? Like, this is what I want in 2 years, but I'm not going to get it here. How would you bring that up?
I think just like that, this is my goal.
Yeah.
What is available for me at this company, and if they don't have an
No,
answer, it's
indeed.
probably time to move on.
Yeah, at Target, I was working on the apps team, and I'm not a super strong visual designer. I love the prototyping and the journey mapping and the thinking, the problem solving behind it. But I'm not an illustrator. I never will be. And they really wanted a strong visual designer, and I really struggled on that team. But I was able to say to my manager at the time, like, look, these are the things I was interested in, and I do think you should leave if they're like, no, we can't fulfill that. You know what I mean? But sometimes if you do come to your manager and say, this is what I'm interested in. I also just applied for a few different jobs at the same company, and they saw like, oh, because I was able to pick what I was interested in, and then show, when I did interview for a design operations role, they were like, whoa, we didn't even know you had done any of this stuff or had thought about things in this way. So I say just go out there, apply, try to put yourself in the place yeah.
5 people want to know, how do you showcase your soft skills in your job application?
I would say personality. Like I always throw something in there, maybe in my cover letter that just shows, somehow stick out amongst the other people. But I'm curious what you would think.
Oh, I haven't put down a resume in 10 years. I'm a total noob in this.
Is it the resume or the interview?
It's job application, so I'm assuming that's resume, portfolio, interview, cover letter.
So the cover letter is probably your best bet. It's really hard. It's nearly impossible to display soft skills. There's probably other things to display in there to break through the noise. In the interview, I think it's the questions that you ask. I think it's, for me anyway, a lot of interviews, they all kind of go the same way. When I give them the candidate a chance to ask questions, that's the most telling part of the interview for me, whether they have the experience, because they want to know what our process is, how we do things, things that are specifically relevant to the position.
And I would say, like, this has worked for me. I don't know if it would work in every experience, but like, I've been creative and kind of gone beyond. Like, one time I had an interview and the person just straight up was like, how would you define UX? And I like bumbled through it. Like, I just, for some reason, I was just like, wait, what? And so afterwards, I just drew up a comic strip of like how I taught my grandmother how to use a microwave in the 80s, and how that was my first experience through UX. So I chose like a creative path to be like, hey, I made a mistake, but like here's my actual answer. Like, the door is never really closed. Like, and just represent who you are creatively.
So for Michael and Andrea, what is remote work been like? How would a designer who's in an office environment 5 days a week transition to be a fully remote designer?
Yeah, so when I first started at Abstract, my first 2 weeks, I was like, oh my God, I was just so used to being around people. I am an extrovert. All of our meetings were like walk and talks, you know? And now all of a sudden I was only interacting on Zoom, and I had a moment where I was like, ugh. I make sure I'm really active in the local community, design community. I have coffee dates in the morning, I have lunch. And then also I just have started getting some of that social through the Zoom, and that's a little weird, but yeah. So.
Michael, what about yourself?
That's the same. Yeah, I mean, it's getting awkward on video is the only way. You have to sit in a video chat and be okay with that awkwardness. So like we messed this up for like the first 2 years I was there, where every meeting was had a purpose. It had an agenda, and then you get off the meeting, and then you're alone in your office. And so what we started doing is just opening up Zoom rooms and letting people join, and it feels a bit more like an office. Because then you can just have a normal conversation that doesn't have to do with the agenda of that meeting. But I still think this is relatively uncharted territory. I mean, only like 4% of companies are fully remote. And so we're still figuring it out.
Is your team all in the same time zone?
We hire Pacific to Eastern in US and Canada.
What about yourself?
Yeah, we're mostly US. We have one, Tim Van Dam, our main designer. He's in Brussels. And yeah, I think that's, but we have customers all over the world. So I'm having like 11 p.m. calls, and yeah.
Yeah, how do you deal with that? So if you've got customers all around the world, and your schedule can be crazy, do you stick to like a 9 to 5?
Bring them around to your perspective if you are at odds.
As a founder, one of the biggest lessons that I've learned is that just because somebody does something differently than you would, it doesn't mean it's wrong. So you have to focus on the goal and what are you trying to accomplish as a team? Is this still accomplishing that? If yes, then shut up and let it happen.
Last question, just go through across the panel. What is the most difficult conversation you've had in your career, and how did you deal with it?
I really don't want to say.
I had to lay off a co-founder when I wasn't one, because we were going through an acquisition downsizing, and somehow I got the short straw and had to have that conversation with one of the co-founders who had built the company So that was probably the hardest.
Yeah.
The hardest one.
What about you guys?
I made a list of all the difficult conversations, but this one really stuck out. It was between when I was changing from the apps team at Target to design ops, and my old boss, she got peer feedback, and she printed it out, and it was like, Andrea can be seen as aggressive and intense or something like that. And I knew exactly who it was from. It was from a product manager. We did not get along. He was risk averse, and I was like, come on, we need to change this. But he said, and she should know that in Minnesota, that personality does not fit the culture.
What's Minnesota?
So I'm not from Minnesota, I'm Southern, and we're just like, hey, this is us. And I guess in Minnesota, and somebody told me this is maybe what is the stereotype of Canada is passive aggressive, So that's very Minnesotan words.
Yeah.
And I had to, my new boss was in the room and she was like, that's bullshit. And so I was able to call it out, but I had to really struggle to be like, do I have a conversation with the person I know that said that? I chose not to because I was like, I'm just gonna walk away. But yeah, I was really trying to figure out what to do with that information, and talking to my old boss and my new boss and just being like, you'd never say that to a man, aggressive would probably be, what's the right word? Ambitious, assertive. So, and really trying to figure out what to do with that information.
I get fiery a lot too. I hate it.
How do you deal with firing people?
People call me fiery.
Oh, fiery. Sorry if you said you fire a lot of people. What?
No, I find in Canada we do have a very polite, passive-aggressive culture, and I grew up in Iran, so very aggressive Middle Eastern.
Yeah.
And the first couple workplaces where I worked was a lot of other immigrants, and it was fine. The bosses and I would always just say the thing. And once I started working in tech, it was a lot more like Canadians, generations of having been raised here. And stuff from people coming to me listen, that email you sent, you gotta put a lot more pleasantries at the beginning. You can't just go straight into the end. Okay. So then what happened is I became soft, and I just started to hold back all the time, and then I just hated myself. And it became this it was I'm not saying any of the things that's on my mind. And so since then, I've been working back to my fiery self. And it's hard. You just kill it, you pull it down, and then you just go home and you just think about all the things you wish you said during the day that you didn't. So be fiery. It's good.
Yeah, do you find
Canada needs it.
Well, guys, thank you so much. Really appreciate all the questions. There's quite a few questions that didn't get covered, so I will try and get those answered maybe on an email or follow-up newsletter so we can get those out. But yeah, really appreciate you listening. Thank you very much.